I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler on tonight's episode. We have a magazine announcement. Got the date, got the drop. Will give you some information on the orders. Talk about the orange and blue game. Look at the offense, look at the defense, and we'll wrap with some transfer portal discussion. Will, let's jump right in, man. Magazine season is here. We are launching on May 15th. Some of you at the orange and blue game may have encountered a flyer or two, a postcard or two out there. So if you did, be sure to go on, scan that QR code and get on there. But we will open up the orders at a certain date. I'll give you the information. I'll let you give the information here.
Yeah, so if you ordered last year, you're going to get an email the minute it comes out, May 15th, with a link to be able to order. We're doing it through a little bit different distribution channel this year. So hopefully the shipping will be smoother than it was when I was stuffing envelopes last year and trying to get them out in my quote unquote free time, which anybody who knows me with my 4 kids knows that's a limited quantity. So we decided to do it a little bit more professionally this year. So yeah, May 15th is going to be the date. We might release some stuff later in the year, depending upon, or later in the summer, depending upon what happens with the transfer portal. But certainly, we appreciate everybody who bought one last year, and hopefully you're going to start coming across some of our ads coming up there right when we launch. And, we're excited about it. About a month to go until it actually releases, but we're going to release it on the 15th. You'll be able to order it directly, get it shipped directly to your house from the ordering interface. And, hopefully about a week after that, be heading your way and be ready for Memorial Day, Father's Day, all that sort of stuff. I'll tell you, that's the thing I'm excited about as I look at all this stuff. And really what we've kind of tried to do with the magazine this year is set it up as sort of, and this was your idea, Nick, but set up the idea of what's everybody saying about Florida's program, and then sort of systematically take on each of those arguments. Now, look, there might be some bad news in there, right? There are some places where we go, hey, look, this is definitely an area of concern. These are the things that are going to have to go right. But I think there's some stuff that people have said that isn't necessarily true. And so to be able to take that on and give yourself fodder at the water cooler, or give your dad or your mom fodder at the water cooler when approached by a Georgia fan or a Miami fan or a Florida State fan who's woofing about what happened last year. I think people are really going to enjoy that. And I think there's some unique content this year that's going to be fun to read. I think the last year's was fun to read too, but we've really tried to make sure that we're targeting in on what people care about and what is going to portend how Florida's going to play in the 2024 season.
Yeah, there's been plenty said about the Gators this offseason, so plenty of bulletin board material for the Gators to use as fuel. So we'll address some of those points in the magazine, and we'll go through some of the usual features will be in there as well. I know we're going to do another map section. We got a section this year called the Crib Sheet. That's a bunch of small stories in there, and Will's got some of his usual great analysis. I know one of the most popular things last year was the play diagrams with the QR codes. We'll link right to the play. Maybe we're going to work on maybe putting some of those videos on our own page with no commercials. So we'll make it nice and easy for people this year. So got a little bit of work to do on the project still, but we're enjoying it. I love this project every year. This is a passion project for both Will and I. And hey, I know Will dropped earlier in the year that we're going to look to expand this at some point, but this is where it started with the Gators, and I'm loving every second of it. Will, it's a ton of work, but I'm loving every second of it.
Yeah, it's funny. The planning takes a ton of time, figuring out the distribution, all that stuff. That's the stuff that's not fun. And then finally you sit there and you go, okay, we got the distribution plan, we got the advertisers, for the most part. We've got all these different things that have now come together, and now it's just a matter of writing it. And we've been doing the research really for this since probably January. So it's sitting down and trying to tell the story around the numbers, around the film, around the new additions who've come in both in the fall and the spring, all that stuff getting put together. But I should mention that, we still do have a couple of spots left for people who, if they want to advertise, reach out, Will at readandreaction.com. I can send you some information about numbers and costs and all that sort of stuff. We've had other people reach out as well. We've closed some deals, but we still have some space left if people would like to advertise.
Will at readandreaction.com if you're interested. We will have links out when we're getting closer to the launch, but we wanted to at least make the announcement, make people aware. May 15th, we will be launching. You'll be able to place your order on May 15th. So stay tuned. We'll be announcing updates every week, but that's your first look at the Read Reaction Preseason Magazine for the 2024 season. Will, Orange and Blue game, another look at the 2024 season here. Uh, you saw two good quarterbacks on both sides of that ball with Graham Mertz and DJ Lagway. We'll start with Mertz and on the blue side. Mertz, he looked like himself. It was a steady performance. You saw a couple downfield shots, but just steady and consistent, like we saw last year. We saw one mistake in there, but other than that, there's times where a little bit under pressure, he's struggling. That's typical for him. At times, it's typical for most quarterbacks, quite frankly. But he doesn't have the mobility that we saw on the other side of the ball there with DJ Lagway leading the Orange team. Uh, I was impressed with Lagway from the sense that this is a brand new player here. This is a true freshman. This is someone that he certainly does not look like a true freshman. Like if we had to lean on Lagway to go this year, I'd be very excited to watch. But luckily for Lagway, we do have a piece in front of him in Mertz that can help him develop, help him grow. It seems like the off the field influence is there. They seem to have a very positive relationship. That's not always the case. We've heard the Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers story, right? It's not always the positive case
Oh,
where
young in Montana, man.
right. Yeah. Quarterbacks don't always get along. Quarterbacks don't always get along. So it's nice to know that there's some good chemistry behind the scenes, and there seems to be an appreciation for taking a leadership role on Mertz's part. That's the one thing I will say about Mertz. On top of the fact that he was a pleasant surprise last year, he's just one of the easiest guys to root for. He comes across well in interviews, and I think he is a very easy guy to root for. So, liked what I saw in the quarterback position, the running back position. We certainly lost RB2 to Georgia this offseason. I actually said his name on Gators Breakdown for the first time in 4 months. Wasn't happy with myself. We're coming off a Gators Breakdown, so if you watch that and watch this, and we're wearing the same things, we do change our clothes once in a while. Even though Will's in his basement, I don't know if Will comes up for air, but a couple times a year. I think this time of year you come up and see if you see your shadow or something like that. I don't know what you Pennsylvania folk do, but it, I like the running back room. I think it's deep. We saw some good highlights from Baugh, uh, Trayon Webb back there too, and we know what Montreal Johnson can do. So I really like what I saw of that running back room. And from the receiver position, he didn't obviously Wilson stood out as he would. Didn't see a whole lot from DK one way or the other to make a big decision, but Mizell flashed a little bit. He didn't show up big in the stat sheet, but you had those moments with Mizell out there. We saw Boardingham at that tight end spot a little bit too. So seems to be some pieces in place where there's some guys that can make that jump this year and become the next big thing for the Florida offense. Well, we really need that big playmaker that behind the Eugene Wilson that can take the ball 60 yards at any point.
Yeah, I mean we'll see what happens. I think the instructive part of the game, especially early on, Lagway came out, opened the game, looked a little bit nervous, airmailed his first third down, so it was an immediate punt back to Mertz and him, and then they used the entire first quarter for a drive that went down for a field goal. And that reminded me a lot of 2023's offense in terms of very ball control, able to convert third downs, get the ball to Trey Wilson when you're in a tough situation. And then once you get down the red zone and things get a little bit tight, okay, now things become a little bit more difficult. Obviously, things opened up a little bit later. We're able to hit Trey Wilson with a couple of big plays back to back. But that would be my concern. My concern on the offense all year long or all offseason long has been, can it be explosive? And you alluded to it in the way you said it. I don't remember exactly what you said, but essentially, Mertz is Mertz. And Mertz is going to have to be more than what we saw last year for this offense to really take off. Now, I think in terms of good news for Florida overall, I thought the offensive line looked better than it did last year at this time, and quite honestly, better than it did against Utah in the opener last year. And certainly Utah, you're on the road in foreign territory or hostile territory, and so it's comparing apples to oranges, obviously. But still, there were some things that you could see where the offensive line is further along now than they were last year at this time, certainly. And that's only going to help a guy like Mertz. The other thing that I think is kind of a positive, probably, is that Lagway showed enough flashes that, like you said, you're comfortable with him coming in as a backup quarterback if there happens to be an injury to Mertz. At the same time, this wasn't Anthony Richardson where every time he touches the ball, it turns into an 80-yard touchdown. Like Lagway is incredibly gifted, but he's not gifted like that, right? Like Anthony Richardson just popped the minute he got out there. And quite honestly, that caused some problems for Dan Mullen there in that, what was it, 2021 season, where Emory Jones was okay, but not great. But the offense was actually pretty good that year. They struggled in the red zone, but the offense was pretty good. But every time Anthony Richardson got on the field, it was an 80-yard touchdown, a 75-yard touchdown, one play, 72 yards, touchdown, and that sort of stuff. You just looked at it and said, that guy is explosive. You got to put him out there. And for various reasons, and depending upon what you believe and what you hear in the background, Richardson wasn't ready yet to jump in, but it looked like he was every time he came out on the field. And that
Mhm.
caused tension, not just, I'm sure, within the team, but also caused tension between Mullen and the fan base. So I'm glad DJ Lagway didn't come out and fall flat on his face, obviously. I think we saw a lot of potential, but I didn't see something in this game that made me go, that guy needs to be the starter. That, Mertz is going to have to win this job. I looked at it and I said, I think they each have their strengths and weaknesses. And the fact that one of them's a true freshman means I understand why the fifth year senior is going to get the nod. And so at least hopefully you don't have a controversy unless things go really downhill. But if Mertz is able to come in and play as well as he did last year, I think you can sort of hold off on some of the controversy you might have gotten if Lagway had just gone out there and thrown for 350.
Are we ever going to see a League Tebow situation again? I know that gets brought up all the time, and then most teams just never even. It's like that's never considered. Uh, I can't believe we haven't seen more models that mimic the Leak and Tebow thing. Tebow was so unique though, in the fact that he was a linebacker. I know Lagway's a big guy, but man, Tebow could just like he could go in there and hit with the linebackers and lower that shoulder. You didn't worry about him getting injured too much when he was going head on with the linebacker because he held his own. That was pretty unique. That was a unique characteristic. So I can see why that doesn't happen in some instances, but with Lagway in short yardage situations, especially down the red zone, you saw a couple instances when they were down the red zone where he can kind of peel out and get to the outside of the pocket and cause some havoc for that defense, be that extra option on the edge as a runner. Do you see him as a situational threat this year, especially in the red zone?
No, I think they're going to probably have packages for him because they got to get him ready in case something happens, right? So in games where Florida, especially early on, you think about the game against Central Florida or the game against Stanford, those are games where they're going to definitely get Lagway into the game and get him some time to play if Florida's ahead in those games and able to do so. But therein lies the problem, right? You would have thought about that last year with Charlotte, and that game ended up what, like
Mhm,
22-7, something like
mhm,
that. And we all sat there and said, oh, this will be an opportunity to get backup quarterbacks in, make sure Max Brown gets his run or whoever's going to come in if there's ever a
mhm.
problem. And they weren't necessarily able to do that last year. In terms of the Leak Tebow thing, it's interesting because, look, Leak was getting booed in 2006 when Tebow would come off the field.
Kentucky.
It's easy to forget how difficult that had to be for Chris Leak. And, even now in the Swamp Kings documentary, you could see they didn't really delve into it too much in the documentary, but there were a couple of comments by players who were wondering why Tebow got all the pub that he did versus the team itself and all the different five stars and personalities and all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
So it's not as though that situation wasn't without tension either in 2006 or 2008. And the fact that, winning tends to hear all that sort of stuff. And nobody's going to go out there and complain and say, oh, that guy who won the Heisman Trophy the year before we won a national championship, yeah, he's not as good as Cam Newton, right? But if Tebow had struggled, if there'd been specific, if there had been a two-headed quarterback with him and Newton, who knows what would have happened. So I think you gotta be really careful with that. You gotta have the right personalities. You gotta be able to control the locker room and know how the locker room's going to react, all that sort of stuff. I think it becomes it's a balance and a delicate balance, especially when you factor in that balance with, let's be honest, Billy Napier is probably coaching for his job this year, especially if things fall apart. I mean, Florida's 4-8. I'm not sure that we got the same coach next year, and so he's got to play to win. He can't play just for development, and that's a moral hazard. I mean, because you want somebody to be building the program. The question will be: is Lagway part of that build, or do you go with the proven commodity and not worry about building because you just don't have the luxury of having that worry?
Yeah, and I obviously think the answer will be it depends. Let's see what happens early in the season here. So I think we're gonna get it. I think we'll have a good idea on that situation by middle of September. Will I think by after the first three games, we'll have a pretty good idea on where that's going. Defensively, it's the spring game. I have a tough time. I have a tough time with the defense on the spring game because there are players on the field that are not allowed to get hit. So it's not a true defensive performance. Even a guy like Lagway who can extend. It's obvious when Mertz. It's obvious when it's a sack on Mertz. With Lagway, with a guy who can run like that, there's a few times where he's rolling out and making a throw. You're like, yeah, you had a guy in your face. That was pretty difficult. So it seemed like the defensive line got some pressure in some moments, which that's a positive, obviously. But you saw some busts in coverage early on. You saw some of the same issues with the secondary we've seen in the past, but I'll tell you that everyone was killing poor Sharif Denson for the Eugene Wilson highlight, the 60-yard or what I forget what the yardage was, Will, but was it 60-ish yards touchdown?
Hmm.
Wilson
Yep,
runs
6
an
years.
unbelievable route where he's just going full speed, cuts the outside. Bridges is playing that safety, goes to the outside, follows like just falls for the fake completely, and Wilson steps up the middle here. I think Denson thought he had a little more help with the safety there and was just playing catch up in coverage. But you made a good point on that on Gators breakdown tonight.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the the, the thing you got to remember is that the defense, the score of the Orange and Blue game in 2023 was 10-7. And so we all thought the defense was much improved with Todd Grantham gone, and Austin Armstrong coming in for Patrick Toney. And it turned out that last year's defense was maybe the worst defense that Florida's ever had, at least in terms of yards per play and score that they gave up. There are some signs that the defense is maybe better than what they were overall. You'll have to get the magazine to read more about that because we definitely have a section on that. But the big thing for me is that you look at like a guy like Teddy Foster who's lining up across from Trey Wilson. Is that what's going to happen when the lights go on in August? Nah, it's going to be Jason Marshall. It's going to be Devin Moore. It's going to be Triquez Bridges who are lining up across from the big time wide receivers for the SEC opponents. You're going to have DJ Douglas, Asa Turner, and Jordan Castell back at safety. You're going to have Grayson Howard
Mhm.
and Shamar James at linebacker, and you're going to have Cam Jackson and some of those big guys up front rushing the passers. So the defense was more divided up than it has been, or it was more divided up than it will be, not that it has been. So you weren't necessarily going ones on ones. You know, the deep pass to Wilson, that was Bridges is probably the one who's at fault there, but he's also playing free safety. And how Bridges is a corner. He was a corner at Oregon. Maybe they're moving him to safety, but still, I mean, that's the whole point of spring. If you're going to move a guy and if you're going to move a guy position wise, this is what you want. I mean, you want him making mistakes, and especially considering the route, right? I mean, look, Trey Wilson made Georgia look ridiculous at times last
It
year.
was a hell of a route by Wilson.
It was.
Yes.
So, I mean, he's protected against the corner route, and all of a sudden it's a post. Now, I sent you some stuff afterwards about your responsibilities when you're playing match quarters coverage, which is what it looked like they were in. And the safety is supposed to take away the post. Like his goal is to take away the post while the trailer takes away the corner. And so, if you're looking at that saying, oh, well, the trailer, the star wasn't able to keep up, not necessarily true. He's not supposed to take the post. He's supposed to take the corner. The safety is supposed to take the post, assuming that's what was called. And that's one of
Mhm.
the things is that, you know, it's hard to tell given sort of the broadcast angles exactly what defense Florida was in. And so
Mhm.
without knowing the defense, I have a hard time pinning it on people. But again, I look at it and say Sharif Denson and Triquez Bridges at star and safety. Is that the combination we're going to see during the regular season? Maybe at some point, but I think if that's a combination we're seeing against Georgia, something's gone very, very wrong in the secondary, given who Florida's brought in. So that's why I think it's kind of hard to gauge what the defense is
Well,
really going to do.
and that leads me to the next point here. I think you're listing off all the names. You talk about Howard and James being together at the linebacker spot. They're certainly on that front line. There's reasons for optimism. Going to reserve judgment. I want to see this defense actually go out and do it before I get excited about anything. We've thought that they were going to be improving over the last couple of years. Hasn't happened. Got to see it. There's certainly been an emphasis on tackling as well with Will Harris coming in. That's a positive. I'm okay if someone looks at the situation and goes, it looks better this year. It looks like it's going in the right direction. But my issue, Will, is what's the depth situation with this defense? You get very young very quick, and there are going to be injuries at some points along the way. It's still going to be a developing unit, in my opinion, in 2024.
I mean, I don't think anybody thinks Florida's going to be a top 10 defense, but I think if you look at the positions that are really critical, if Devin Moore, Bridges, and Jason Marshall can stay healthy, if Jordan Castell, Asa Turner, and DJ Douglas can stay healthy, that's the start of a defense that can be really good. And the good news is that you really only need three corners and two safeties to be successful, which is probably why they're cross training Bridges as a safety. Is the thought process is if you can have him cross train, then if you get an injury at one spot, you'll be able to move him if he's one of the more talented guys who's out
Mm-hmm.
there. I think Florida has more depth than they have in the past. I think or at least over the past couple of years. The question, as always, is going to be the explosives. I mean, that's been the question with Austin Armstrong. Quite honestly, if you start looking at the profile of Ron Roberts, that's actually been the question with Ron Roberts' defense as well, is the explosives. Now, the explosives last year occurred because Florida really struggled to tackle. And that's maybe something to take from this one, is there wasn't like just missed tackles that turned a 10-yard play into a 25-yard play for
Mm-hmm.
the most part when it came to the explosives. The explosives were a nice pass when someone got beaten coverage. Now, look, I mean, somebody still gets beaten coverage, and if you're not missing a tackle and it's explosive, then it probably means you weren't in the right spot. But at least if you're not in the right spot, it's not a physical mistake that's going to happen over and over and over again. So I feel better about the defense now than I did before the game, I suppose. I don't feel great about it. I don't feel like this isn't going to be a top 10 unit. But
In the
if you told
SEC,
well, I mean, they'll be top 10 in the
top
SEC,
10
but
in the
top 10 in the
SEC.
country. I think if you told me they were going to be 30th, if you gave me over under 30th
Take
for
it.
yards per play, I would definitely take the over, but I think they're going to be pretty close to that. I think they're going to be I think Florida is going to be a borderline top 25 team with a murderous schedule. And the question will be, what does that look like? And how quickly can they get there to start with? Because the front end of the schedule is where they can really make their hay. And so, they need to be that top 25 team or borderline top 25 team right from the jump. They can't take 2 or 3 games to get to their full potential, because by the time they get to their full potential, they're getting into the teeth of the schedule.
Right, right. And like you've said this a lot our podcast this offseason, but if Florida's just an average defense in 2024, that's a huge improvement. So it doesn't have to go from bad to good or bad to great. It just needs to go from bad to average. It just needs the needle needs to move a little bit at least. And if it does move more than that, even better for this team. So speaking of which, one of the couple of big plays saw a couple turnovers. Denson jumped in front of a ball, rustled it away from DK. Nice interception. And we saw one from Manny Nunnery, who hit the transfer portal this afternoon. We are on recording on Tuesday. As of now, as of now tonight, I believe Nunnery is the only one we've seen in the portal from Florida to this point. Of course, it's his second time in the portal in his career, and it's his second time in the portal as a Florida Gator. So he's getting back in there, and he's heading in a different direction. Didn't see a super friendly Instagram post from him until you sent it to me, Will. But I think you're going to see a lot of movement in this cycle from basically what we're hearing across the college football landscape. But I'd say day one, a lot of names in there, but nothing that's shaking the earth quite yet.
No, I mean, I think I told you last week that I was skeptical that the spring transfer portal was going to be this big hot, hey, major guys moving from one place to another. Because the only thing that would make that happen is giant monetary deals, right? I mean, where somebody just can't get something matched. But the thing is if you've got, like, let's say you've got a Heisman level quarterback in the fold, and someone comes and offers him that big time money, well, he's just going to go to you and say, I'm getting this offer from someplace else, match it. And if he's a Heisman level quarterback, you're just going to match it. I mean, that's the reality, is that these guys are going to have leverage, and they'll be able to turn the threat of going into the portal into something major. But I don't know
Mhm.
whether they're actually going to have to use the portal, which means the portal is going to be for guys who were getting beat out at the positions that they're at. So a guy like Nunnery, right, who may be a very good player for a certain program, but last year wasn't great when you look at what he did at linebacker when Shamar James went down and when Scooby Williams struggled. Like he went in there, but it was average to below average play. I would say below average, depending upon which player rankings you use. And so if I want a below average SEC linebacker, okay, I can find that guy in the portal. If I'm a team like a Louisiana or a team like a Central Michigan, that kind of player is very, very valuable. But that's not somebody who's going to go to Ohio State and be competing for playing time right away. And so that's going to be the question is, and I'm sure Florida's going to have 2, 3, 4 more guys going to the portal. But the guys who are going to go into the portal, I would be incredibly surprised if the guys who go into the portal are guys who are like projected starters. I think what you're going to have is
So
guys who are depth
you're
pieces.
not bracing for another RB2 situation?
I mean, I'm not bracing for that. Um, I mean, that one specifically hurt, not necessarily because of RB2 leaving, but because of where RB2 went.
Right.
Right. And yeah, sure. I mean, there might be an opportunity for Kirby to stick it to us again. And I mean, he's been doing that ever since at least Dan Mullen got there, just stuffing him in a locker and kind of doing that with Napier as well.
All right, it's not the Kirby Smart podcast. Move on. Move on.
I
You
just,
made your point.
so I am of the mindset, and until the numbers prove me wrong, and I haven't seen a number yet that proves me wrong, I'm of the mindset that outside of quarterback transfers, the transfer portal is not a needle mover
Mm.
in terms of like championship level football. Like that the you're not going to get you're not going to get a Reggie Bush level player who transfers in the spring. You might get one who transfers in the fall, but even then, I mean, how often have we seen it? I mean,
Well,
you know,
I do think a Keon Coleman from FSU was a late entrant last year. For Michigan State had a few of those guys in the spring, but other than that, I can't think of a lot of high impact guys that transfer this time of year.
I
But
mean, look,
it's also
Florida man,
different. It's also that second transfer is now possible, so guys can go on the market and just test their value if they want at this point, right? That's the difference
sure.
in this year's
I
cycle.
mean, this is the thing, right? It's the rules are a little bit different than it has
Yeah.
been in the past. So there's not some 15-year just treasure trove of data that we can go mine and say definitively this is what's going to happen. So you kind of have to use your intuition and say, okay, well, so Florida went and got Crenshaw Dixon and Devon Manuel in the transfer portal at tackle.
Right.
Both of those guys look like they're going to start, unless Austin Barber comes back healthy and has a really strong fall camp. Those guys both might start. Florida picked up 2 starting tackles in the transfer portal. Those guys were sort of average to slightly above average at their previous stops. If they do exactly that next year in the SEC, that's a major upgrade for Florida at both tackle positions, right? That is a valuable thing that they've brought into the transfer portal. But those guys aren't winning Heisman trophies. Not that the left tackle ever does win a Heisman trophy, but
Orlando Pace almost did it. Orlando
well,
Pace almost did it.
well, but that's my point, right? Is Orlando Pace isn't transferring. The
Right.
guys who are transferring are guys who can take you from left tackle getting driven back into Max Brown in a way that makes an embarrassing gif to, hey, we can hold up against a team that decides to run sort of a standard type of stunt,
Mm.
which, you know, that's one of the things that's going to be in the article that goes up on Read Reaction reviewing the spring game is the offensive line was able to pick up some things that they weren't even picking up last year against Utah in the opener. So that's where the transfer portal is valuable, is filling holes. It's, you know, if you think about you know, the phrase I always used to like, or that I heard a long time ago that I like using, is a band-aid on a bullet hole, right? You can put a band-aid on a bullet hole and it will stop the bleeding, but it doesn't actually treat the fact that you got a bullet hole. The way you treat the bullet hole in college football is high school recruiting,
Mm.
but there's extraordinary value in stopping the bleeding. Right. And so really when you think about going 6-7 and 5-7 his first 2 years, Billy Napier has to do both, right? He doesn't have the luxury of operating on the patient and going 3-9. Like he's got to put a band-aid on that bullet hole and show progress while also trying to fix everything else. And so that's really, I think, why you've seen DK is a senior, Slackman is a senior, Bridges is a senior, Douglas is a senior, Turner is a senior, Gums is a junior. Manuel's a junior. Crenshaw Dixon is a junior. Clay Millen, who's probably not going to play. The quarterback is a junior. Pup Howard's the only guy who I expect is going to get significant playing time, who's not a junior or senior that they brought in through the transfer portal. That is the definition of putting a band-aid on a bullet hole, stop the bleeding so that you can operate on the patient, because the patient's going to die if you don't stop the bleeding. And at some point, they're going to have to stop the bleeding elsewhere. But at least for 2024, those guys are guys who are going to be able to hopefully raise the level of the team overall to a point where you can save the patient.
Well, if we did need to stop the bleeding, we know the special teams unit would send out 10 guys to do it. So we got one short, but we'll get there. I think we had 9 at one point last year, didn't we? So we're going in the right direction on special
Hey,
teams overall. That's a good thing.
none of the 10 had the same number. And
Gotta take the positives.
I would say we might want to contact the soccer team to see if we could find a backup kicker, because there were some ugly ones when it wasn't Trace Matt
Oof.
kicking.
Well, maybe do we do any of those free field goals? What was up with the scoring? They earned it in practice, the extra field goal in practice, they said. They had
Uh,
the orange team was granted an extra field goal in the game there. That's the only reason they had 17, because they had a couple of drives where kicker just did not have the best kicking luck with the orange team.
So that, I mean, I know they did it on purpose, but in some ways it was one of those things where I was like, guys, read the room. After Lagway completed a couple of balls to get a first down, and they had exhausted all the timeouts from the other team, they could have just taken knees and
Yeah.
run out the clock. But
Yeah.
instead they kept throwing it to give it back to Mertz to drive in the other direction. And I'm like, like,
Was
given
there
some
was
of the
there
issues.
4 punts in the last 2.5 minutes? I
Yeah,
think it's like
I don't
something
know,
like 4 punts in the last 2 minutes of the game,
but
or then the
given
drive.
But
Yeah.
given some of the issues that Florida's had with clock management, I'm like, this is a good opportunity to work on clock management. Like, we're not Miami. Take a knee.
Oh man.
I'm just kidding, everybody. Don't get.
Miami. Now we get it's a good transition to the season. We get to turn our attention to Miami. So Cam Ward had some nice numbers in that scrimmage down there on the soccer field there down in Miami. So, and I think
I mean,
there's about 832 Hurricane fans that were very excited to witness that. So it's
that's more than they have for a normal game. So it's fine.
it's it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. That game's going to be intense. So we're gonna have a nice build up to that Miami game. We're about halfway home toward the football season, but we're getting closer to magazine season, which is becoming increasingly difficult to write with these transfer portals. So you guys can feel a little sorry for us if you want, but we're having fun with it. We're enjoying it. We're making progress. We just can't quite put the finishing touches on a couple until we know who is where exactly. So it's a good time. We're getting through it, and we look forward to delivering another good magazine this year.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't want it until we can start to put those finishing touches on it. And that's the
Yeah.
thing is I think last year we started right around this time taking pre-orders, and we don't necessarily want to have you commit to something until we've got the final product out there and can push it. And so the hope is that the way we've set up distribution this year, it'll get to you a little bit quicker. Certainly get to anybody before they take a Memorial Day holiday. So if you're going on the beach, you'll have something there to read for the beach. But I actually think, and to me, this is the thing that I'll be doing, is I'm gonna give it to my dad. Right. I mean, it's a piece that, Dad and I not necessarily have a lot of things in common that we can talk about. But this is one of them. Florida Gator football is one of them. And so, giving that to my dad after having maybe flipped through it, if you buy one from us, you can flip through it, give it to your dad, something for you guys to talk about. That's one of the things that we really hope people do use it for is as a communication tool. So, certainly you'll have the ability to get it before Memorial Day if you're heading to the beach, but also the ability to get it to your pops for Father's Day for that guy who you just never know what to get him. This is sort of that premium piece that he wouldn't think to buy for himself. Maybe he doesn't even know about Read Reaction, but hopefully he'll know about it after magazine season.
Yeah, it's that's definitely a good concept there for Father's Day. So I think there are plenty of guys who would enjoy that one. So Dad's got enough ties. Get him a magazine. Get him a magazine this time. All right, for Will Miles, I'm Nick Knudsen. Have a great week, everybody, and go Gators.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to Stand Up and Holler. If you're interested in more information from me and Nick, you can go over to readandreaction.com. You can like and subscribe our YouTube channel here at Read and Reaction, or you can go to patreon.com/readandreaction to support us, get extra information, and we do Ask Anythings over there every once in a while as well. So check us out. Thanks for listening.